Hey guys, welcome to day 5. This actually might be the last content we're going to go over. Since the test is not going any further, we might be ending with World War II. But today we're going to focus on Hiroshima. Why did the United States bomb Japan? We're going to be looking more at like military strategy all around, social, diplomatic, political, cultural reasons why the United States might have done it. But we're also going to be focusing on kind of more at the timeline and review. So I guess just remember that after World War One, we have the Great Depression, which is coming on. But before that, in the 1920s, the United States is out there in the world, producing goods, investing in Europe. And meanwhile, we are going to hit the Great Depression. In Germany, this is especially hard because of inflation. This is a woman wearing, Deutschmarks as a dress. The end of the 1920s, we have the Great Depression, and we are moving towards war. And before we get into war, I think it's important to remember how many people died in this war. It is hard to even fathom in today's numbers, but if we look at total World War II deaths, I think one of the things we forget is how many people die. So I think one thing to start with is the Soviet Union. Why I think I have this in red. I need to switch the color. The Soviet Union has over 25 million people die. 25 million. You can't even find the United States on here. It is very, very, very small. The other thing is China. 20 million people in China. And I think the question is, why are so many of these folks being killed? 20 million Chinese people. We do not think about this. And this is not, looking at non-nation status. So like it's not showing 6 million Jewish folks who were killed by the Holocaust, which are kind of within, all of these numbers. But it is staggering the amount of people who die in World War II. So I think when we're looking at the number of deaths, as we go through the slideshow, it's you have to remember and think about why are so many people dying in China and the Soviet Union, and we're going to kind of get to that. So starting off with the end of World War I, we talked before about Wilson's 14 points. He wanted to have a League of Nations. He wanted to make sure there was never another war. Of course, we know this does not end up working out well. So we are going to make Germany pay. U.S. is going to get involved with some loans to Germany to try to keep Germany solvent. But through the Great Depression, through other things, by kind of campaigning against the Treaty of Versailles and anti-Semitism and fascism, the Nazis are going to rise to power. Now, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start here, right? And under the Treaty of Versailles, they are not supposed to be militarized. They are not supposed to be doing any of this. But Hitler is going to violate that almost like right away. And the first thing he's going to do is go into the Rhinelands in 1936. And Europe and the United States are taking this policy of appeasement. They're not doing anything. The next thing Hitler's going to do is take out and annex Austria. No one does anything. And then he's going to take this kind of region, which is German speaking. And this is that idea of he's trying to make one greater fatherland of all German people. These people speak German, so they should be a part of Germany. And all through this process of Hitler, violating the Treaty of Versailles, expanding into these regions, it is appeasement. And at Munich, the Europeans are going to be basically saying, this is it, no more, and that's it. So Hitler is going to start by going into here, then he's going to take out Czechoslovakia, and essentially FDR, the United States at this point, and FDR is just saying we should quarantine these aggressors, we should not let them expand anymore. And in essence, Europe agrees. And so what they say is that this is it, no more. If you expand any more Hitler, we are going to go to war. Meanwhile, the United States is doing their neutrality acts. They are saying we are not going to be getting into war. We are not even going to trade with people who are at war. So Hitler is going to violate the Munich Pact, and he is going to invade Poland. So when he invades Poland, this is essentially what starts the war. He is also going to create a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, which is going to share Poland. But by invading Poland in 1939, this is what's going to pull Europe into war. And Europe is going to set up like World War I. They're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're ready for them. No problem. The United States at this point is saying we are going to do the cash and carry. So we're still, FDR is trying to get around the Neutrality Act by saying, all right, guys, you need goods from us. If you bring your stuff to America, give us cash, so there's going to be no loans, you can have some of our old military ships in exchange for military bases. So this is cash for carry. And again, we still have the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. So this is in 1939. The United States is trying to remain neutral, but FDR is kind of slowly moving towards war with cash and carry. In 1940, the Germans are going to blitz right past the French. They're going to cut off the troops. And this is where, I don't know if anyone has watched the movie, the Battle of Dunkirk. Essentially, when the Germans come in here, they're going to cut off Europe. They're going to cut off the troops up here. This is when they're going to have to surrender and like flee into Dunkirk and get picked up by a bunch of, boats. Anyway, so this is the beginning of the German wins in 1940. And by June 1940, France is gone. The United States is still neutral, although the FDR is trying to move more towards aiding the Allies. In 1941, Hitler is going to violate the non-aggression pact. He is going to go into the Soviet Union. This is probably, one of the lessons that everyone learns is this is a mistake. This isn't going to want to do it. Right. Don't invade Russia is usually one of the things people say. But anyway, so they are going to invade Russia. Let's do it. Go. Present on this device. Sorry, guys. Technical problems. Anyway, don't do it. Don't invade Russia. Hitler's going to do it. He violates the non-aggression pact. He goes into Russia. There it goes, right? And it is probably not a good idea. So he goes into Russia. The other thing is France is basically gone, and he's going to start attacking Great Britain with air raids. This is the Battle of Britain. While all of this is going on, the United States is like, all right, maybe we should try to help out. So FDR is going to convince people to sign the Lend-Lease Act. This essentially is going to be the end of our neutrality acts, where the United States is lending war material. I don't know how you really do that. But anyway, they essentially give food, oil, weapons, warplanes, all these things to the Allies, which are going to include China, the Soviet Union, and whatever is left of France, which is not much, UK, all these folks. So with the Lend-Lease Act, we officially start giving things to the Allies. All right. So we're going to kind of skip to Japan real quick. So in 1910, Japan has been also very nationalistic. And they are... Come on, buddy. Do it. Anyway, we'll just kind of keep it. There we go. You can do it. Anyway. They are invading, I don't know why it's not doing it. Anyway. Try it one more time. One more time. All right, never mind. They're going to be invading Korea first in 1910. And their major move is going to be to Manchuria first. So Japan goes into Korea, then into Manchuria. And when they do this in 1932, the League of Nations is going to condemn it. They are going to leave the League of Nations. And probably the biggest thing to remember is when we looked at that chart before about how many millions of Chinese people died, it is because of the imperialism of Japan. Probably the best example is what's called the Rape of Nanking, which is just one example of these massacres. So in 1937, this is when they take over Nanking. It is a massacre. People were basically testing out their swords on, civilians. We have this advertisement in Tokyo, which was like 100 people, an incredible record contest to kill 100 people using the sword. It is huge atrocities that are taking place in China on the hands of Japan. And this is just one city with 200,000 to 300,000 dead. And this continues throughout the war. So the other thing is they start to expand even further. They're going to sign the pact with Hitler. And essentially, while they're signing with a pact to Hitler, they figure that America is not going to enter the war with them, because if they enter the war with them, they'll be going to war with Germany. So while they sign this agreement, they are expanding into Vietnam. They're expanding further. And when they expand into Indochina, at the time, the United States is going to, essentially be broken from its neutrality. So you have to keep these two things in mind. One, in 1941, we signed the Lend-Lease. We are giving aid to China, which is essentially Japan's, which is where Japan is at war with. We're also giving it to the Soviet Union and Great Britain and France. And then also in 1941, we are going to do the oil embargo, which froze the Japanese assets in the United States. And since 80% of Japan's oils comes from the United States, this is a huge break. So not only are we giving assistance to their enemy, we are also not giving them any assistance. So Japan considers this an act of war. They try to declare war. It doesn't work out, but they are going to attack at Pearl Harbor early in the war. Now, their idea is with Pearl Harbor is that they could take out the United States before the United States gets them. And the idea is they're going to do that. Now, one of the things as we talk about why do we bomb Hiroshima is we have to talk about Pearl Harbor and then some of the tactics. And some of it might be cultural or our kind of understandings, maybe misunderstandings of what was going on with the Japanese. But with this idea of at Pearl Harbor, people seeing these tactics of the kamikaze, willing to, attack Pearl Harbor, people felt like that the Japanese would be willing to do anything and would be unwilling to surrender. They create a lot of fear, a lot of cultural bias. And so with the tactics of the Japanese, it's just different than what people are used to, and it, sends a message. So Pearl Harbor in and of itself is why we go to war. 2,403 Americans are killed. 18 ships are sunk. Luckily, some of them were not there, which helps when we have to go to war. But revenge for Pearl Harbor is real. It may also be a decision as to why we want to drop the bomb. Another thing is racism, which we talked about in the last kind of unit with like the home front. We have Japanese internment, what we talked about, and, propaganda, and just a lot of racism that's happening at the time. Japanese folks are often depicted as rats, sneaky, and, the Jap. This is another reason why we may have decided to bomb, say, Japan and not Germany. Although we go to war because Japan attacks us, we are going to focus on Europe first. And you know, this is where we enter the war. A lot of people don't think about it, but we do not enter D-Day first. We enter first through Africa. These are like those famous tank battles. So the United States knows that, that we don't want to hit them right where they're strongest. We try to hit them where they're weakest, and we are going to go to Italy. Meanwhile, the Soviets are going to turn the tide at Stalingrad. Millions and millions of people are dying. You have to remember as well that the Soviet Union is under a dictatorship. We talked about totalitarianism. So Stalin is essentially telling people, you are going to go kill some Nazis with or without a gun. I don't really care. He is mobilizing all of these people. And also many of the millions of people were killed as the Nazis were invading. But when they are pushing back the Nazis, it is just this huge red army. Now, the United States is not a totalitarianism. It is a democracy. It is not going to be popular for us to just throw people at this war. So we are kind of being more strategic. We're edging in. We're getting a foothold. And then once we get a foothold, what are we going to do? We are going to bomb the crap out of Germany. We're going to use our planes to bomb Germany. This is what we are doing. We are going to use our technology to bomb Germany. So the United States gets a foothold. We are bombing Germany. D-Day is in 1944, June 6th. And the Soviet Union has been dying this whole time. They have really wanted the U.S. to open up an Eastern Front to kind of like relieve some of their pressure. And finally, in 1944, they do it. The United States is going to start to break out, and we are pushing forward. This is the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. The United States is going to make its way through. Meanwhile, millions upon millions of Soviets are throwing themselves at the Nazis, going through Poland. And then it just becomes a race to Berlin. So the United States at this point is trying to see who is going to get to Berlin first. And essentially it is the end of the Nazis. Not the official end, but pretty much the end. So as they are about to defeat the Nazis, the big three, Stalin, Churchill, and FDR, get together, and they are trying to figure out what to do as the war is about to end. So this is FDR, Stalin, Churchill, the big three. They have been together since the beginning of the war. If you look at FDR, he does not look so well. He looks a little ill. He is going to die shortly after by FDR. Truman is going to take his place after this. Churchill is also not going to be reelected, so he is going to be out, which leaves us with Stalin after the Yalta conference. But at Yalta, FDR is going to, basically want help from the Soviet Union with Japan. This whole time, we haven't been focusing on Japan as much. We have been making some headway. He wants free elections in Eastern Europe, and they decide to divide Germany. So FDR is going to die shortly after this. I think personally, a lot of people say that like Truman does not trust Stalin as much as FDR has, worked with him before. So it does kind of change the dynamics of the war. So here's where we were before Yalta, and then basically after Yalta, they are going to meet in Potsdam to discuss the terms of peace, and it is done. So meanwhile, what has been happening during this time is since 1939, so even before the United States got involved in the war, you have to remember D-Day, the day that will live in infamy, is in December 1941. So in 1939, we are starting an atomic bomb project. FDR is going to secretly agree to do this, and it is because Albert Einstein, and you have to think about who it's from, is a Jewish German scientist who fled Germany, wrote a letter to FDR, and he was essentially like, this is what's happening in Germany. The United States needs to start a bomb, or Germany's going to get it first, and that would be terrible. So FDR had been working on this bomb since 1939 in complete secret. $2 billion was spent, which would be about $23 billion today. This is an enormous amount of money. Truman does not find out. He is vice president. He does not find out about the bomb until after he becomes president. So you have to imagine that Truman becomes president towards the end of the war, finds out about this bomb, finds out we spent $2 billion on this, which would be $23 billion today. And he's like, we have this thing. You have to think politically. In a democracy, it's going to come out that we spent this money on the bomb, that all of this energy had gone into it. It would not be popular for Truman to not use this. And economically, that would be a waste of money if we didn't use it to him. You have to also imagine that we decide to target Japan early. So even before Truman took office, right when we are developing the bomb, when we start to think about where might we use it, was decided early in the war that it was going to be used in Japan. Now, this being said, we have to discuss a couple of things about bombing. The United States used extensive bombing in Germany, and we kill a lot of people with traditional fire bombs. And like the bombing of Dresden alone, we kill more people than we are going to kill with an atomic bomb. So when we talk about the morality of the bomb, what is the morality of thousands of bombs versus one bomb? In the end, you have just hundreds of thousands of people dead. We also are going to firebomb Tokyo as well, which results in more dead than the atomic bomb. So, but the other thing about why we choose Japan early has to do with the fact that we bomb Germany. So because we bomb Germany, we are going to decide to target Japan because it will be a virgin land. As a scientist, people were like, well, if we bomb Japan, we will figure out what this bomb actually does. But the other thing strategically why we choose Japan and say not Germany is because even if it was before the end of the war, is that it had less chance of hitting allies and POWs and these other things since it was so close together. Let's see if I can play this. So, the Trinity test in July 1945, the Manhattan Project is going to end in 1945 with a successful test. So I think it's important to remember that these scientists who were making this bomb, this was kind of theoretical. They did not really know what was going to happen. This was a true test. They didn't think that it was probable, but they said it was possible that when they did this test, that a chain reaction would happen and that this chain reaction would never end. So some scientists, I can't remember the statistics, but it was like, 1 in a million, that maybe we're going to set off this bomb and maybe we're going to set off an atomic reaction that never ends and maybe the whole world will explode. So although they did not think it was probable, it was within the realm of possibilities that this is what was going to happen. Oppenheimer, when he set off this test, said, now I am become death and the destroyer of worlds, which is from the Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, so the Trinity test is in 1945. And now we know we have the bomb. So here is the thing. We have the bomb. We know it. This is where it gets complicated and kind of like a high school politics. I don't know. So now we have Truman. No more FDR. Truman, more distrustful of Stalin. So Truman is going to tell England about the bomb. He's like, hey, I got this thing. It is amazing, right? But he does not tell Stalin. Now, the thing is, Stalin knows about the bomb. He knows about the bomb because he has spies that tell him about the bomb. But he also knows that Truman told him and did not tell him. So it's like he feels like he's being left out of the crew. So Stalin is becoming more distrustful of the United States because of the way they acted about the bomb, not telling him, not including him as an ally. But the conference goes on nonetheless, and they negotiate terms for the end of World War II. But as far as this, the big thing that they decide on is the Potsdam Declaration that if Japan surrenders unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Now, I actually forgot to talk about this, but the other thing about this time is that in Yalta, they decided that 90 days after the surrender of Germany, Stalin was going to help the United States defeat Japan. So there is a big question. Does Truman want the help of Stalin? He knows we have the bomb. If Stalin helps the United States, they're going to kind of claim more land in Asia. And there is something to this kind of thing where, this is kind of like boots on the ground. So this is where the Soviet Union is, right? Towards the end of the war. This is where the Allies are, right? So how are we going to divide up Europe after the war is essentially where boots are on the ground. So when you take a look at what happens to the division of Europe, keep an eye on that, and then look at how we divide Europe. Okay, Soviet Union, you get that part, we get this part. It is essentially where boots are on the ground. So if Stalin comes in to help out the United States defeat Japan 90 days after the surrender of Germany, we are going to have to share more of Asia with Stalin, and we don't necessarily want to do that if we don't have to. So meanwhile, in Japan, this is kind of getting more to strategic ideas. That whole idea of stopping Stalin, that's diplomatic. We want to use the bomb not because of what's happening in Asia, but because of what's happening in Europe, right? So why do we want to do it? That's why. So the other part of why do we want to use the bomb has to do with our strategy in Japan. Here is Pearl Harbor. This is called island hopping. We are not going to go to every single island. We are going to hop around, or what people call leapfrogging. We are going to go to the Battle of Midway. We're going to go to, Guam. We are going to kind of make our way towards, Japan. Now, once we get to Iwo Jima, we are within bombing range of Japan. So we are island hopping our way through to Japan, and once we get to Iwo Jima, we can bomb the mother country of Japan, which is our whole goal, right? We take over an island, we make an airfield, we move closer, right? So the Battle of Iwo Jima is probably a significant one to remember. This is it's in 1945. There is a huge amount of American casualties during this time. 26,000 American casualties, over almost 7,000 people killed. There is also a lot of Japanese casualties, although it is less than the Americans. It is a huge kind of amount for their population. So I think another thing that was kind of like going into the American psyche, it was feeding into this idea that Japan will never surrender, is this idea that there were 21,000 Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima and only 216 were taken prisoner. They were only surrendering if they were unconscious or disabled. They were fighting to the death. And, Americans saw this at Iwo Jima. It was fierce, gruesome battles. The most famous picture is that one with the American flag. There's a statue of it. But it's also famous because of how hard these battles were and how significant that flag raising was. So there is a kind of a weird concept that some people believe, which is we're using the atomic bomb to save lives. So there was an estimate that was given to the president that by invading Japan, it would cost 1.7 to 4 million American casualties. And so what they essentially did was they took Iwo Jima as a small island, and they were like, if this is what it took to take over Iwo Jima, what would it take to take over Japan? And they were like, 1.7 million American casualties, including 400,000 fatalities. And then they also estimated 5 to 10 million Japanese fatalities. So, why would that be? Well, because they felt like people were going to fight to the death. Not just soldiers, but, everyone else. In this picture over here, we have high school girls preparing for an American invasion with bamboo spears. So, people really felt like the Japanese would never surrender. The invasion would be costly, not just for Americans, but for the Japanese. And it would also be highly unpopular. It is after Germany surrenders, if we have the bomb, if Truman invaded Japan, he would never be reelected. This war needed to end as far as his political ambitions as well. So there is a question about would the Japanese have surrendered. So the United States wanted unconditional surrender. This is politically popular. We don't want to negotiate with the Japanese. So the general thinking is they would never surrender, like we talked about, Iwo Jima, propaganda, kamikaze. This is what we're thinking. But that being said, some people in the intelligence community had ideas that they would surrender with some conditions, like we want to keep the emperor. So while the United States said they would never surrender, it was kind of being known that they may have surrendered if they were able to actually negotiate and keep some terms. But that being said, we at Potsdam say, unconditional surrender or utter destruction. It is decided that we are going to drop these bombs. Leaflets are dropped, kind of warning of this utter destruction. Hiroshima is not the military target that we wanted at first. The weather is going to change some of these targets. It is primarily a manufacturing town, and we are going to decide to bomb it. The immediate impact range of this bomb, it is just, utter destruction. The heat is intense. It destroys buildings. It incinerates people. If you are in the immediate impact area, you don't have a question about what you're doing because you are gone. After the blast, though, you have these concussive waves of heat and fire that come afterwards. And so, unfortunately, what would happen is when this mushroom cloud went off, people came out of their houses that were miles away. They saw this bright light. They got out of their house. And then, because light travels faster than sound or heat. And then what happens is as they're looking at the light, what happens after is it comes the concussive wave of fire, basically a fire inferno, and, blasting out windows and these sort of things. And then what comes after that is the radiation. So in the immediate blast, people are literally vaporized. There is some question as to whether this is a thing, but people say they find shadows in this immediate area. And then the people outside of that radius are going to get severe just fire burns, but then afterwards, radiation. So between 90,000 and 146,000 people in Hiroshima and 39,000 and 80,000 people in Nagasaki are dead, half of which are immediate after the first day, and then many of them are going to die slowly over time after. And, folks are going to suffer radiation for a long time. For homework, what I want you guys to do is think about what are the top causes of the bombing of Hiroshima, and then the second most significant cause. So try to prioritize political, economic, strategic, social, and diplomatic. I think I'm going to add cultural on there. And then also for homework, I'm just going to give you guys some readings on either, I'm going to assign, based on your last name, either the American perspective or the Japanese perspective. And you're going to try to create a art or Flipgrid or paragraph kind of summarizing some of that. It's kind of like some documents based on this. Have a good break. This won't be due till after Wednesday. Also, I'm going to be posting up the last test because it got to be a mess. All right, guys. Take care.